Most on with us. We're really capturing a lot of states here and a couple of countries. I'll walk through them in a little while, but just so that they're able to see us and we're able to see them. So let's go say hi. Let's say hi to everybody. Yeah, look, oh, see a lot of names, and we see Wallace there. Hi, everybody. That's the bathrooms are to the left outside of this room, and it should be the fourth door to the left. And you're going to walk in, and the women is to the right, and the men are to the left. So right, left, fourth door, or third door down. Okay. At one point, we're going to have breakout rooms, so we're going to stretch. And if you signed up for room 1, you're going to stay in here. If you signed up for 2, you're going to go to the second room outside this door. And 3 is the third door on the left as well. If you change your mind throughout today and decide you want to go to a different room that you signed up for, that's fine too. But for now, let me introduce Dr. Tony Capone.
So good morning all and welcome. I'm Tony Capone. I'm the president of the PRRF Family Research Foundation. As I think many of you know, I'm also a practicing retinologist. Of course, my name is this pediatric retina. I'm going to shamelessly refer to the notes that Stephanie put together for me to make sure I don't forget anything. So first of all, this is our third Family Advisory Council conference. It's our first one that's hybrid, and also I think the first time we're all collectively in person. The foundation and some of its prior iterations has had meetings in person, and obviously we've not done that for a long time. Even pre-COVID, it had been a bit since we've gotten together. It's just great to have everybody here. I think the opportunity to, it's great to see people on Zoom, you get to know folks, and it's nice to see people for the first time, and you kind of feel like, a little bit, from having seen them online. It's a whole different thing to shake people's hands and, get to sit and talk to them between breaks and find out about things that they do with their families and things like that. So, that is made possible to the generosity of donors who've allowed us to put all this together. I'd like to thank everybody who has so generously donated. Also, it will be a chat option for the online version, so please feel free to dip into that on a regular basis and be as much a part of the conference as you possibly can. Louisa has already chatted about, is going to say more about the chat rooms and breaks. And so Lisa, I'm going to bring you back actually to kind of walk through the agenda, if you would, for the meeting this morning. And again, a very warm and genuine welcome to everybody here in person and on the virtual.
Thank you, Dr. It's so wonderful to see so many people here. I wanted to share with everyone that we actually have representation, many of them through virtually actually. And we have representation from Serbia, England, Canada. We have Canada here today as well. Hey, Malaysia, Argentina, coast to coast, actually from Michigan, Florida, and California to Virginia. So welcome everybody. I'd like to see who in this room has traveled the furthest. Who would that be? All right. Oh yeah, right?
Louisiana.
You're the winner. Michigan here for but we also have a prize for the second. And who might that be? Louisiana? All right.
Thank you. Let's see how is change this virtual or is this not for time?
I was thinking about that momentarily.
I know the little girls yesterday were adorable and playing in the snow and so excited to see each other. And I hope that that's what this program is going to serve going into the future, is individuals, our young adults that are here today that didn't get to start something like this when they were young and 9. So hopefully they'll grow up into a community that will get to know each other and have memories to share. Let's see what we have here. I am also looking for the notes here that Stephanie was so wonderful to put together. Thank you. So I hope that you guys use today really as an opportunity to get to know one another and ask questions. That's valuable for you. If you walk away with one thing today, then we've done our job well. And that one thing could be whatever it is that brought you here today and what you wanted to walk away with. Dr. Capone talked about the chat room. We want to make sure that we do that. We have here today, Dr. Mitten. Dr. Mitten, can you raise your hand for those who don't know you? Thank you for being here. And he has a wonderful student with him today as well. These are the individuals that do work in the research room and will take us on our tour later on in the day. They do the great work for these folks. So thank you. Okay. So as you can all see on the screen is the agenda for today. So we're going to start off with a little bit of research update, live Q&A. We have questions that have already come in. So we're going to source those and be able to answer those questions as much as we can. And then if anybody would like to ask a question that hasn't already been asked during the research section, there's a mic in the middle there. If you just stand up and walk up to the mic in the center aisle between the tables, and you'll have an opportunity. Nicole GDC, who is here, will facilitate and help with that portion of the agenda today. We'll have a song presentation from our wonderful Stephanie from Louisiana. Jennifer, all these names and all in one day. Jennifer, my apologies. That I'm so excited to hear play. And those of you that are virtual, please raise your hands on if you know, raise your hand or put in the chat if you can't hear, but I'm sure you can. We kind of set it up so everyone can hear and listen to Jennifer. Let's see. And does anybody have any questions? Anything that I did not cover? After the song, we'll go into the breakout rooms, but let's just a little reminder that this meeting is being recorded. A link will be available to everybody. Virtual attendees, if you can please remain on mute so that we don't hear the background noise here and you don't hear our background noise as well. But during the breakout sessions, we'll mute and unmute you on our end. Submit any questions throughout the event. You can just put them in the chat. And for those of you that are here, you have notepads in front of you, just write down any questions that might come to mind, comments. I hope you exchange names and numbers today and emails and really stay connected. A little disclaimer, I'll give you a minute to kind of read through that. Again, we are not here to provide medical advice or anything like that. We just want to make sure that, it's mostly for general information purposes, but I'll give you a minute to read through that. Okay, and now, without further ado, I'll bring you back Dr. Capone for our research portion.
Thank you, Lisa. So the foundation has a dual mission. One is to support the community of folks who are impacted by pediatric retinal diseases, and of course the other is to support our research initiative. We really have two folks who primarily anchor our research initiative. One is Dr. Grenzer, who will be joining us shortly. I'm going to go ahead and intro her, although I kind of feel like she doesn't necessarily need an intro. Dr. Grenzer is my partner at ARC. In addition to being a very talented vitreoretinal surgeon and physician, also, of course, with an interest in pediatric retinal disease, Kim is a PhD as well. with her PhD at work in molecular genetics. She really oversees the laboratory initiative and is not really only the brains, but always also the heart and soul in many ways of our laboratory work. She has been working in this area for many years, writing publications in scientific journals of significant stripe, and will be here shortly to share some information in that regard as well. Her partner in the lab is also Professor Kenman, who, as is true of Dr. Drenzer, is a translational scientist. And I'd like to just spend a couple seconds explaining that term. It's really critical to how we think about the lab and bring ideas to fruition. So translational science is all about taking a notion or a problem that you see in the office, understanding its basic biological fundamentals, if you will, and then finding a solution to the problem, and then bringing that solution back into the clinic. And so that's the translation. The translation is from clinic to lab and back into the clinic. And translational science is a passion of ours because of the urgency to bring treatments to the people that we tend to and fix the problems that we see. So Dr. Minton has been working in the lab for many, many years. Again, he's really been our anchor in the lab in terms of execution of projects, and working with Dr. Drenzer in terms of conceptualizing the projects, breaking them into milestones that then bring us to our final goal. So, Dr. Minton, if you would do us the honor of sharing some of our experience in the lab over the last year. Thank you.
Welcome everybody here and virtually wherever you are. For those of you from Canada, that's where I hail from originally. I'm a dual citizen these days, and all my kids are born in 3 different states. As I went around the U.S. Getting my postdoctoral training, including at the Kellogg Eye Center and the National Eye Institute, and then getting here in the early 2000s is when I met Dr. Drenzer and Dr. Tracy, Mike Tracy, and I got sort of drawn into Michael Tracy and Kim Drenzer's enthusiasm for doing bench to bedside, trying to apply our biochemical analysis and problems to usefulness. And that was nice for me because at Western Ontario, where I did my PhD, that was kind of the philosophy of that department at that time in the 80s and 90s, was that they wanted to do bench to bedside work. And as a scientist, most of us scientists, we find questions, we try to get funding to do experiments, we answer the questions, we publish it, we get more questions, and we just keep doing this cycle. And you find out that when no one person can get stuff out of the lab. You can build up a lot of knowledge and you can put stuff in the library, but you want to get stuff out of the lab. And what I've learned over the years is that it takes a bunch of people getting together. So the clinician friends I have, Dr. Drenzer and Tracy and myself, together, you get these things to happen, but it's person, and it takes foundations like the Pediatric Retinal Research Foundation. So as you know, your foundation has funded the development of a pediatric retinal research lab, which was activated about 2012. And we'll see that today over in Dodge Hall. And I threw my hat in the ring with Mike Tracy and Kim Drenzer, who had this crazy idea that we need to do this and have a lab that really helps to focus getting stuff out of the lab. And so that's what we worked on. And the two major things that we've done in that time, and now here we are about 10 years later, it's actually worked. We've started to do next generation sequencing with an 8-gene panel for patients from the ARC Eye Biobank. So right now we've sequenced about 125 subjects, and we've done genetic reports to the clinic on about 80 of those, and are finishing up the other 40 or so this term with the help of one of the students, Samuel, who's an undergraduate, who's and so that's the other thing that I think people might not realize is not only does the PRRF help to fund the research and the project work we do, but as a university, we use those projects to train students in things like practical human genetics, teach them about the eye. Many of our students want to go on to med school. A lot of them have been diverted into ophthalmology because of this interest. So that's another benefit to make the next generation of scientists and physicians and people that want to do research. So that's gone well. One big change we're having right now in the last year is we've just got some reagents being developed right now. We're expanding our testing panel. Right now we'll sequence 8 genes. We're going to be sequencing 30 genes and also reducing the cost per sample processing. So then we can process. We don't want to really be limited. And as you know, any kind of testing we do in the lab, no family ever pays for that. That's always, we find money from foundations to cover that. And that's the way it's always going to be. And that's the way it should be. The other big thing we got going that started right during the pandemic, and we managed to get it going anyway, even with the shutdown for a while, was Dr. Drenser and Dr. Tracy had always wanted to make Norrin, that you've heard about, a protein which is a growth factor that we need to grow a retinal vasculature. And then there's a bunch of signaling proteins that pick up that protein. And many of these proteins are made by the genes we sequence in families that have fever or Norrie's disease. Also, we sequence for retinoschisis and persistent fetal vascular syndrome. And there's other conditions too that we want to add. And so that'll be the benefit of having a 30 gene targeted sequencing panel. And we do all that sequencing right here. We do it in-house. We don't send it out anywhere. And then we teach medical students and undergraduate students and graduate students how to do that. So as a molecular biologist and a human genetics person, I try to teach them these practical skills so that when they go out in the real world, I'm hoping that they find projects to apply to and keep doing this. So that's something that's happened. And we got Norrigen, which is Norrin, basically it's making the human Norrin protein, and we make it in bacteria, because in bacteria, you can make a ton of protein. And so that was the phase 1. It's called a Small Business Technology Transfer Grant, STTR. A lot of companies in this country, in all areas of medicine, agricultural, engineering, they get small business technology transfer grants to do feasibility studies to see if they can develop a product for real world use. And if they do that, the government says it's yours. We don't want it, just do it. You're going to make companies, you're going to apply solutions for problems that exist. And a lot of things are invented that people don't realize and start that way. And so basically Carrigen Therapeutics, which used to be called Retinal Solutions, but now they're Carrigen Therapeutics. That's the company that Dr. Drenser and Tracy and Capone have developed to basically move Norrigen from the lab into, well, hopefully clinical testing in the very near future. So that's gone along so well. We did the phase 1, and the phase 1 STTR is a type of grant where you have to show feasibility. So we had to show that we could make it, we could hold it, so it would be biologically active, and we test that in mouse models, and we test it on primary human retinal endothelial cells that come from donor retinas. And we were succeeded in doing that, and that let Carrigen Therapeutics just about a year ago apply for a phase 2, where they get a lot more funds for more years, and that helps the company do more testing. And so right now, actively, Dr. Drenser's been overseeing getting Norrigen tested. There'll be research, there are research companies that specifically do toxicity type testing and rabbit models, things that the FDA requires, ocular therapeutics. That's happening right now. And already Norrigen, instead of just making it in my lab in my little batches of flasks, which work fine, that's been transferred by the company to a company named Wacker Therapeutics. They're in Germany, and they do GMP manufacturing, which is manufacturing of products that you would need to be pure and clean and safe enough to use in humans. for example, injecting into a human eye. And so the company has that already in progress too. And so now we're testing right now. I have another graduate student on a master's project. We will be doing more testing with our mouse models, where our goal is to find the minimum and maximum doses so that Dr. Drenser has scientific data when she goes to FDA to choose the doses that would be used for initial safety testing and then for further clinical trials. So that's kind of what's really all happened in the last year or two. So it's kind of fun to have it at that point. So Norigen's moving on the way. We're keep the genetic sequencing going. We're educating people to do that. And that's all really because of this organization, PRRF. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benton. I thought it might be of interest to the group also to maybe take a peek behind the curtain in terms of what it takes to get a novel drug that you designed in the lab, if you will, from the lab into the clinic. And it's actually a longer and more arduous path than you might imagine. Many times when you produce the drug in the laboratory, it's a bit of a, kind of, for lack of a better word, I'll say a slurry. It's the drug with a variety of other constituents that are made. So, for example, drugs can exist as individually as monomers, as we say, or they can combine into sort of clusters, if you will, and always the same unit of that core drug, but it can be either a dimer, 2 units, quadrimer, et cetera, et cetera. So there's first purification of the drug to make sure that what you think is working is actually working. Is it in the monomer form? Is it in the dimer form? Because you have to give it in a way that is going to work. So first you isolate it, then you've got to get the protein, if it's a protein, to fold in the proper fashion. So again, so that it will effectively work. And then it needs to be purified. And then in the manufacturing process, as we will often use either bacteria or other kind of biological factories to make these drugs, there are also minor impurities. And then the impurities all need to be filtered out. All of these things really take an extraordinary amount of time and effort. They sound conceptually straightforward, but getting from the core ingredients to something that you can deliver into a human eye needs, of course, to be meticulously done and is a rather long path. So I think the last, I'd say, 6 to 12 months of our efforts have largely been devoted to working through this pathway, even setting up the vials and how they are filled and where they are filled and what the components that go into the vial as preservatives and so on and so forth. All of that is part of getting from your idea in the lab to, in person. Part of this pathway also requires meeting with the FDA, as you might imagine. The process of bringing what's called an investigational new drug, or IND, to the market is really what I've just been describing. So we've just recently completed our initial meeting with the FDA, what's called a pre-IND or PIND meeting. That meeting went very well. It was very positive. We frankly were encouraged to continue on the path that we proposed. It's actually, as you might imagine, a fairly complex package to put together. If you're going to get the FDA's kind of attention. There were between 20 and 30 FDA members on the call with our scientific team, and that went really, quite well. So we are continuing down our path. Again, it's a very interesting journey. Starting out, as I said, in the clinic with seeing folks with problems you think maybe you might have a new idea about and bring into the lab, and then this part of the journey as well. I'm not sure if Ken mentioned this, but the average time period for sort of conceptualization of a new drug to get it to market is somewhere between 15 and 20 years. So that speaks to the challenge of the journey. And really, no Ken said it, and I'll reiterate it, none of that work is possible without the ongoing, long-term, as you can gather what I've said, support of our community. So with that, we're going to go on to our Q&A on research now. Let me start by introducing Nicole is the newest member of the Pediatric Research Foundation board. Nicole has had experience clinically, both as a PA and in the field as a representative of pharmaceutical companies, and has been a great addition to our board. And Tracy Shapiza is also going to be with us virtually. There she is, helping us moderate the Q&A as well. So with no further ado, we'll go on. We have some questions that are pre-submitted, but we also have some questions that are going to be submitted through the chat, and we'll open up for questions from the room as well. So
great. So we'll play hot seat.
Yeah.
I have some questions you guys submitted ahead of time, but if you have questions, please come up here and we're gonna let you jump in and ask your questions while you're here. So let's start. We'll do some orderly fashion here and stick with a theme. I think you may have already touched on all of this. The status of testing of Norigin, when will it be available in the market, and how many injections will be required for this drug?
So that's a great question. And I'm going to answer the question as asked, as well as what I think is the spirit of the question, right? So first of all, we are on track to have our first in human aspect of the Norigin trial sequence to be somewhere in Q2 of 2025. And so let me digress briefly. So the clinical trial sequence, again, the theme being getting a drug to market, right? It consists of three levels of clinical trial: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is safety. You're not really seeing if the drug works in the safety phase. Now, of course, you're interested when you make the drug to see that it works, but the goal of safety trial is just that: safety. Can you safely administer the agent? And then typically in phase 2, you start to see if you have effect, and there is typically done across multiple dosages. So, and the dosages are usually fairly significantly different, power of 10, and then power of 100 difference in terms of the concentration of the drug which you give. In that, you determine A, if there's been an impact, and B, you get a sense of what the appropriate dose may be, and that's what brings you to phase 3 of the clinical trial. And then in phase 3, you start to see if the drug has the effect that you aspired for it to have when you first designed it. Once it makes it through phase 3, that's when it becomes commercially available. And actually, there's a phase 4 because even when you do a clinical trial and you test a drug in hundreds or thousands of people, that's different than what's going to happen when it's available commercially. Even for a rare disease like fever, there are, on the order of 20,000 people in the United States who are affected with fever. And so the denominator changes, and as greater use of the drug occurs, whether it's this drug or any other drug, then you continue to learn in the market as use tends to go to say 10,000 or 100,000. Dr. Renzer, good morning. Even after a drug makes it into the market, there's a phase 4 phase of evaluation, which really consists for the first, say, year or two, where people see what happens when the drug actually gets in the wild, if you will, when it's widely deployed by practicing physicians. So that's the timeline to getting to market, and just a little sidebar about clinical trial phases. And then in terms of dosage, we don't know the answer yet. To rephrase the question, how many doses of Norigin would be given for its effect, presuming that it's effective when that time comes. And that's going to be something that we learn in the clinical trial.
Awesome. So I have a couple, probably 3-parter for you. This one involves Europe with regards to Norigin. So will PRRF be involved in Europe? And subsequently, what does it look like for clinical trials for Norigin to be in Europe? And are you going for European approval?
That's a great question. So, as some of you may know, so we have the FDA, Food and Drug Administration in the United States. There are analogous entities in other countries, and in Europe, it's the EMA. And the EMA has fundamentally the same function that the FDA does, and drugs that make it through our system, for use in patients need to make it through their system. And so we are going to be going through, assuming from our lips to God's ears, assuming we have the success we aspire to, we will be going through the EMA process. And so the drug is anticipated, the drug will be deployed actually worldwide. So yes to that question. I'm going to tease apart some of the component pieces to what we're doing to get to where we want to go. So the foundation is one part of that equation. There are three parts. The other part is Oakland University, where we are doing the work and where the Pearl Lab exists. And then the third part is the company, Carrigen, which is bringing this forward. So Carrigen, the foundation, and OU, Open University, through the Pediatric Retina Research Lab, really work together on this initiative, each of them having a different role in bringing this forward. So I say this because it wouldn't be the PRRF that would sort of be bringing the drug to market in Europe. That would be the Carrigen arm. So, and this is fairly common for a common construct for drug development. There are the conceptualizers of the project, and then who in the clinic who will bring the project to the lab. The lab is where the science is executed, and then there's usually a corporate entity that actually takes care of the business of, purification, bottling, so on, and bringing it to market.
Great. We have a lot of interest in clinical trials. Can you speak to how people can get involved in them?
Well, sure. I think there are multiple routes to engagement in clinical trials. One, of course, is when you visit a practitioner who takes care of the disease or the condition that you have, and their knowledge of the availability of clinical trials for your problem. So another quick sidebar. Clinical trials are for diseases that don't have a solution, right? You don't do a clinical trial, say, for aspirin for headache, because we already know that solution already exists. So clinical trials are really kind of the cutting edge of care, where you have a problem that doesn't yet have a meaningful solution. So you would have to have that kind of problem, for example, to be eligible for a clinical trial. Your clinician would be one way to get in. If he or she would refer you and say, you have this issue, and either we, speaking of his or her own practice, are engaged in research in that area, or they will send you to another, or refer you to another center that does that kind of work. And that's how, for example, we end up seeing, pediatric retina is such a niche that, and we have such a deep experience. That's how we end up getting folks globally, because folks are referred to a center of excellence for a specific area for A, care, and then B, engagement in clinical trials. So either your clinician locally may be engaged in clinical trials, or he or she may refer you to a center of excellence, or you can use the Google and find out if something is available, online by doing your own homework for the condition that you have.
Great. Before we keep going, does anybody in the audience have questions? And if you're not keen on asking them, if you hand me one out.
Oh, sorry. Can we have Stacy also?
We could probably have someone shuttle the mic around. It's probably easier than having people get up and go.
And Nicole, let us know when it's time to ask some questions from the online chat as well.
That's Tracy.
Oh,
I wanted to ask for patients who have had treatment, let's say injection or laser treatment, do you know if they will be able to participate in clinical trials?
So that's great. So again, I'm going to answer the specific question and then the spirit of the question. And when clinical trial is conducted, there are what we call inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria, right? So having the condition is clearly one of the inclusion criteria, but sometimes there are other criteria that will determine whether or not you get in. So for example, a treatment may be only for a certain phase of disease. Right? And so if you're not in that particular phase of disease, either more advanced or less advanced, you may not be eligible for treatment. So really your question speaks to, are there inclusionary and exclusionary criteria for this particular treatment? And laser or prior injections would not be an inclusion or an exclusion, would not be an exclusionary criteria. Right? So patients who have laser would theoretically still be eligible as long as they had the other features that were relevant to inclusion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Do we want to get some from online?
Tracy,
Great.
share your
Hi.
Tracy.
Yeah, is everyone able to hear me?
Very clearly.
Okay, great. We have a number of questions, but I'll just start at the top. This is specific to Nori disease, but I think it can be more generalized question. Please let the audience know how we can actively follow up on research around clinical trials and other information coming out in the scientific literature.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, so first of all, we do our best to keep people current on what's happening in our own lab through Sightlines, our own communications. So if you haven't signed up for Sightlines on the PRRF website, I encourage you to. Again, it's important to us to maintain sort of a currency of our audience with regard to what's going on. And there is no any other single site that I can think of to send you to. There's a double challenge here, right? Number one is getting access to the information. And then number two is having information in a kind of a form that you can understand. Some of the science is kind of, the language is just so dense, if you will, in a scientific way that, you find an article, but then sort of having it be readable and understandable is a challenge. I can't read things outside of my field. I don't expect everybody, can read the scientific literature with grace. So we go to PubMed to find this, the article that came out is actually many times now we'll find out articles that are in preprint or available electronically before they're printed. So PubMed is free and available to the public. The challenge there, of course, is it's all deeply steeped in scientific, jargon, and so translating that in English, regular English, is the challenge. But those are probably the two ways that I can think of. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Okay, great. We'll do one more online and then I'll hand it back to you, Nicole. There's just a question clarifying, excuse me, clarifying the intended condition for Norigen. So the question is, does this drug help with retinopathy of prematurity, or is it for fever, or are there multiple indications at which this drug can be used?
So that's a great question, and I can answer it, but Dr. Drenz is in the audience. And so, Kim, I've actually already introduced you to the audience. So if you don't mind coming to the stage and you can share with me in answering that. It's a great question.
Good morning. Sorry about being late. I got stuck behind an accident in the freeway, but finally made it here. So thank you to everybody this morning for getting everything started. And one of the really nice things about this therapeutic is its universality for treatments. So it essentially is able to restart the pathway that's turned on when your retina is actually developing as a fetus. And because of that, we think that there are multiple indications. The lead indication is the obvious one, which is fever, for various reasons, but there are a number of different eye diseases that are affected by either incomplete vasculature of the retina or loss of the vasculature of the retina. So retinopathy of prematurity is a great one because from the preterm birth, the retina didn't have a chance to finish its development and oftentimes can't complete its development. So this would be a way to kind of kickstart that retinal development again and try to get it fully vascularized like it would be if it had been a full term. And then there's some other areas as well, that are, kind of in that area. Coates disease is one that may be amenable. It has some vascular issues as well, and has, loss of the integrity of the vasculature, which causes really essentially most of the problems in those diseases. So it's a great question. One of the things we're going to be looking at in dose ranging studies is kind of seeing the effect on these different diseases, and how one may require a lower dose and one may require a higher dose, one may require more frequent treatment paradigms, and one may just need a set amount of treatment in order to kind of reset the development pathway back where it should be.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to take the liberty to make one point of clarification. I'm going to talk about the current treatments for a condition like RLP as well as for fever, right? And the current treatments primarily consist of destroying tissue or giving a drug, both done in the spirit of stopping abnormal blood vessel growth, which is the kind of the core issue in that condition. And so what we aspire to, so how is it different? And Kim spoke to it. Norgine encourages the growth of normal blood vessels, and will likely also have an impact on abnormal blood vessels by kind of turning down their growth. So this engendering the growth of normal tissue, primarily vascular, but some of the preliminary data suggests also neural or nerve tissue is the sweet spot. So I think you're getting a sense of the nuance that's kind of part of this field. So.
Great. Sticking with ROP, I have a couple questions for you. So how effective are the two most common treatments that are given within 2 days of birth for newborn infants with ROP?
Yeah, so I saw that question. I'm not entirely sure its intent because, and I'll explain why. Children who are vulnerable to developing ROP, it usually retinopathy prematurity will usually take several weeks for that condition to develop. So at least at the present time, we don't initiate any treatment until we see whether or not the child gets retinopathy prematurity. So speaking to the two treatments that we use, one is laser, as I mentioned, which kind of destroys the tissue that is oxygen starved. And the other, because that's oxygen starved tissue elaborates a chemical messenger that kind of calls forth this second wave of blood vessel growth that's abnormal, right? The blood vessels that are called forth as compared to normal vessels is kind of like crabgrass to regular grass, right? So you can either kill the oxygen starved tissue and then it stops making crabgrass fertilizer, right? Or you can give a drug that basically is an anti-crabgrass fertilizer drug, and those are the two current methods of treatment. If I'm trying to interpret the question's intent, and those two treatments are actually fairly effective. More than 90% effective. About 10% of children, 5 to 10%, in spite of treatment, will go on to develop retinal detachment, and that's typically managed surgically. And surgical management of retinal detachment, if it's caught early, is in turn 90% effective. So the theoretical success numbers for treating retinopathy of prematurity that progresses to need treatment is 99%. The reality numbers are not quite that good because reality doesn't approximate the ideal, right?
And this is a great question. How effective is telemedicine in the treatment and prevention of ROP in developing countries? And what is being done currently to improve the use of telemedicine?
That's a really good question, because telemedicine across the globe is used very, very differently, depending on the needs and lack of access to care or access to care. So in the United States, it's in my opinion, it's very, very effective when used appropriately. So as an example, we have nurse practitioners in the neonatal intensive care units take pictures, and they do it every week. So babies are seen every week. Their pictures are evaluated and interpreted. And in addition, you can actually compare the previous week, 2 weeks ago, so that if you see a change, you can get an idea of how aggressive the change is, how rapidly it's occurring. And that's the most common way that we use it in the United States. In other countries, there's just a lack of access to care. So if we take another extreme, India, one of the, Dr. Anand Vinakar spent 6 months with us and is very, very active in telemedicine in India, that he has a mobile team. And so he has a team and a camera, and every week he travels a huge circle around a large territory of India and goes hospital to hospital where the imaging is done and uploaded and interpreted to help manage it. One of the hard things with telemedicine in ROP is making sure that the timelines are correct. So where we see the biggest problem is that, as anybody who's had a premature infant knows, you get a lot of eye exams, and if you want to be able to intervene appropriately at the first opportunity when the signal is saying this eye wants to get into trouble, you have to have very, very timely interventions. And so I think one of the biggest challenges in some of the other countries is that they may be utilizing telemedicine, but they may not have a program intact that is making sure that babies are getting, you know, weekly exams and that they're being interpreted very, very quickly. Most telemedicine is asynchronous. So photos taken and then uploaded to a system, and then a reader expert interprets it. It's very rare that there's live or synchronous telemedicine where there's actually a doctor, you know, remotely evaluating as the photos are being done on site. And so but it's great. It's something that I think it has the ability to revolutionize globally the way that we can manage premature infants, especially ones that are underserved or have lack of access. And there's obviously a lot of interest in going to that next step, which is going to be using artificial intelligence to maybe take some of the demand away from having to have a certified reader, you know, physician or an expert who can, in a timely fashion, read potentially, you know, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd want to be able to take, you know, hundreds to thousands of babies and have them all logged into the system and not be dependent on having multiple experts available to do that interpretation. So I think that's a very exciting aspect that has a lot of research in activity right now. You have anything?
The only thing I'll add is the first clinical trial done for you know, digital imaging for retinopathy prematurity was done here, called PhotoRop, and I agree with Kim. I think the major issues of access, right? So you know, you know, the ideal construct, I think Kim's alluding to, is to have an expert in ROP at every baby's bedside. You can't actually physically, you know, achieve that with experts, but you can virtually achieve that with computers. And I think the AI potential in terms of prompt effective diagnosis of identifying kids who need to be treated is really also part of the future power of a digital approach.
That's great, thank you. Anybody in the audience have any questions before we keep going? One more that had a couple of hits. Can you guys speak to stem cell research advances in pediatric retinal diseases?
So stem cell research is definitely a vibrant and ongoing area of interest in research. It is not ready for prime time in any way. It's had a lot of setbacks, which is not surprising, mostly because we don't really have we understand stem cells in a petri dish, lab bench type of situation very, very well. We don't have a good handle on all of the cues that occur when you introduce that stem cell into a tissue. And that has to do with that there are a lot of different pathways that turn on during development and turn off during maintenance, and vice versa. Maintenance ones turn on. And so you have a period of time where cells are differentiating into different cells, and then they mature, and then they just try to maintain. And so what has been discovered is that these stem cells probably require a lot more programming. They probably can't be a true primitive stem cell and just hope to develop into the right thing. They may need to be primed with the right developmental pathways activated so that it has the right differentiation pattern. Or we can take a stem cell and we need to understand how to prime the host cells, so the cells that are in the existing tissue, to be able to express the right signals to make it differentiate into the right cells. So there have been a lot of starts and stops in stem cells because of these problems. So I think that it's a very, very viable future treatment. I think it's going to be very different than people thought it would be 10 years ago. I don't think we're going to have some magical stem cell that's going to go in and recreate an eye. I think they're going to be very, very specific and designed to individual goals.
Yeah, so I can speak to that with absolute authority. I think, and she's spoken to, I think, what's for, in my opinion, misunderstanding about stem cells. There's so much aspirational hope about stem cells and their potential that I think people, why don't you just give stem cells? And, in my less sophisticated explanation for what Kim just said, it's like throwing a wrench at the car and hoping that the car is going to fix itself. It's just not quite that simple. I'm going to take a step further. So there are occasional patients who come and they say they've gone to China for stem cell infusions, intravenous stem cell infusions, or putting stem cells put into the spinal fluid. Or even in the States, there were some clinics that were putting stem cells into people's eyes and with really kind of horrible results. So as a public service announcement, there is no therapeutic use for stem cells for human retinal disease, currently that's commercially available. So whether it's international or in a clinic, run, don't walk in the opposite direction.
Thank you. Do we want to go back online and see if there's more questions?
Sure. We have a question that is really asking about kind of the long-term pattern of fever with age. So the specific question is, I'm 22 years old now, but I found my sight declined around 13. Is there a link between the pattern of fever long-term and the onset of puberty?
That's a really, really great question. It's not going to be a direct answer because it's as I'm sure everybody who's dealt with fever or has fever knows, it's a complicated disease. We did do a study in the lab several years ago looking at growth factors that tend to get upregulated during puberty to see if there was a link, because we did feel that there were, at least in some patients, an exacerbation or a reactivation of disease progression during kind of that puberty teenage years. And we did find a correlation that there were some upregulation expression of some of these growth factors, which did seem to correlate with exacerbation or reactivation of disease progression. So I do think that there is a link, and that would actually make a lot of sense, because if we just go back to what Norrin is actually a growth factor. And a cocktail of growth factors in different combinations get turned on at different times for various reasons. One of the reasons in puberty that it gets turned on is for a growth spurt. Anybody who has kids will know that they look like they grew, 18 inches in 8 months, and that's because of this massive increase in growth factors in those same, many of those same growth factors, not all of them, but many of those same growth factors are also expressed in the eye. And so we did find that there was a correlation there. The other thing we found in looking at, and this really goes back to the importance of, working with Ken Mitten and the biobank and the sequencing that we do, is being able to get a better understanding. We now know from the initial studies of the biobank that the predominant pathway that's affected in fever really goes down to a very particular Wnt signaling pathway. And now we've been able to elucidate more genes, expand the panels, be more sophisticated with this type of study that we do. And because we have such a large database, we've been able to kind of see that there are some people who will have mild non-aggressive disease. And so there are a subset of patients that tend to have that what Dr. Khan was talking about, that avascular retina that we need to ablate, but with appropriate early ablation, they actually seem to stay very quiescent for a very long period of time. There's another subset of patients which are the opposite extreme, which they have a very aggressive and oftentimes by presentation, they're very, very late stage. And so it's very hard to say what that progression pattern looked like because we kind of missed that window. And then there's a third group that we see, which is this question, and it certainly accounts for a large population of people with fever, which is that despite having relatively good vision and good interventions, they seem to have progression. And that's really the frustration with what our current tools are, because we know that the current tools we have are better than nothing, but they're inadequate for a large subset of people with fever that will continue to progress despite the interventions that we have now. And part of that is, and it goes back to why we were so interested in being able, once we discovered that Norrin was such a unique protein in retina development, to see if we could harness that pathway, is because the biggest problem for people with fever is that they are always carrying this suboptimal pathway activation. And so it leads to breakdown of those, the integrity of the vessel walls, which is so important. And it can also lead to worsening loss of vasculature. So those two components together, up until being developing this product, we had nothing that would actually address the core problem. So it wouldn't modify the underlying pathology. It was just trying to control it, if that makes sense.
We're at our time.
Yeah, so we have a segue at this point, yeah.
Yes, Louisa.
We do.
Back to you, Lisa.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, Nicole, Dr. Drenzer, and Dr. Capone. So many questions. I know we have not answered all of them, but we do want to keep the program going. So what we'd like to do is we will follow up with a copy of today's event recording, and any questions that didn't get answered, we'll try to answer them in the next few weeks. For those of you in the audience here, if you write your questions down and just leave them for us at the front desk, we will make sure that we get your questions answered as well. But without further ado, I am so excited for one of two very important moments in today's session, in addition to the research. And the first one is introducing Jennifer. Jennifer is a young lady who is part of the Family Advisory Committee, who's been very instrumental in helping us even put this program together and the agenda, along with the breakout rooms. Just a young lady with a bright future. So for the parents that are out there that have children and are looking to see what the future holds for them, she's just one of several people in the audience that is an example of what your children can do. Sky's the limit. And Jennifer, tell us a little bit about you and take it away.
Thank you so much, Louisa, for that introduction. I'm so thrilled to be here in Michigan for the PRRF's first hybrid conference, even if it was 5 degrees when I got my hotel this morning. So yeah, I'd just like to speak briefly and then give a short performance, which I hope you all enjoy. So a little bit of background. I'm 19 years old and a freshman at LSU. I'm working toward a Bachelor of Music in Vocal Performance, which basically means I want to be an opera singer. So there are numerous reasons why I chose this career. You know, I'm passionate about music. I love the feeling of performing on stage for an audience. I want to travel the world, but I think my visual impairment impacted this decision more so than I realized when I first made it. So I have ROP. My twin sister and I were born 3 months premature, and I had numerous surgeries done by Dr. Capone to preserve what vision I did have. Now for reference, I have what can be called low vision. I can see most of the people seated in this room fairly clearly, although all the details, facial features and things like that are a blur. I know that parents of visually impaired children probably wonder, maybe worry about what kind of future their children can have. You know, when I started voice lessons when I was 10 years old, I certainly wasn't thinking that. I really didn't enjoy it that much. I was like, classical music isn't cool. But yeah, I came to love it throughout high school as I performed more. But I don't think I still ever realized until I started thinking about it recently that it's almost like music found me as an accessible career rather than me trying to search for a realistic career for me being visually impaired. You know, when I perform, it's almost like I'm not visually impaired. It's you know, I'm a character in an opera, or you know, it's like it's this physical sensation, it's sound that I'm using. And I like to think, you know, I like to think that it's a natural talent that I'm trying to nurture, that I was born with, just the same as I was born with my visual impairment, this disability. So I don't know, I just want parents to know that it's very possible for children with any sort of disability, specifically visual impairment, to find, you know, a future, a passion, a career that they may not even realize they've found until they do. And it'll be something that they can pursue with just as much determination and ambition, and they can be just as successful despite whatever their disability might be. So in that spirit, I'd like to sing something for you all. Out of my appreciation for Dr. Capone's efforts with the PRRF, I've chosen an Italian aria. When I sing this, I'll be portraying Susanna. She is the maid to a countess. And at this moment in the opera, she is standing in her mistress's beautiful gardens at nighttime, calling out to her love to join her. This is De Vieni non tardar from Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro.
Louisa needs a moment.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Here we go. We're headed for a 10-minute break, but because certainly Lord knows I need it. That was beautiful. Do we have any comments in the chat? I hope you all got the opportunity to listen to it as clearly as we did here. So let's take 10 minutes. We will have lunch brought up, and upon the return, we're going to break out to our rooms. So for a moment, get up, let's stretch, and I hope your morning is going well. Yes, yes, yeah, good. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I know. Thinking I play a song that's did I go there? What are they doing in there? Yeah, we're pretty sorry, and we're gonna paint. Yeah, right. Yeah. I always think about that. Music and there are years every
Yeah.
So. Yeah, oh, that's what he's got. A little bit. I
But I've already added another add to it.
Yeah, that's what, I know, that's what, yeah, sure to say. He knows that, so she is very sad that he took his position as vice cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They went, the university went to this.
Yeah.
System, but I do my eyeballs.
I remember, yeah.
It's like, oh, you know, this. Two pre-reviews for the committee. And yeah, everything has to be in there. Well, sorry. And it was easy to review. And now they've turned everything into a. Yeah. Endless.
Yeah.
So they don't do it smartly. They like to do form covers. Yeah, and that's
what's missing.
And they don't have Louisiana or so that's like whatever the company sells them, right? So then they have to stay on. And the person suffering with managing that with the
Okay.
Research office.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Like, doing.
Oh, like one is the journey beyond.
You don't have to like sort of. Okay.
Okay, yeah, we switched over. We now have a swab kit. Really nice. I think we should run this family.
So anyway, that's how we.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that and follow up with you and see if we can just get one out, and that might be the easiest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've tried to switch to that, but it's.
Sorry, I know you're
And
short
it
with
works
questions.
well.
I just have a.
You're
okay.
It's even.
Yeah, so which room is low? Oh, this one is be low then. Yeah, this will be low, then it'll be no patients and then the blindness.
Okay.
So this will be one. Okay. So how?
way it's sort of set up,
The next,
like,
I know Jennifer. No, it might.
Like,
For the low vision, stuff like that, but they don't go, you go in room to. So I'm gonna see yours, and I'm just gonna move the camera onto like this side of the room. face and ask everybody to come over here so we can join virtual. We'll go for 45 minutes or the breakout room automatically. I'm just gonna handle those computers. So I don't know if somebody has a question, but I can also clear them on screen and then people can unmute.
We thought maybe I would be doing this, we weren't 100% sure. No, that worked. Yeah. That's both of them in Canada. But you can read me conversation, so Jennifer will email me the questions, so I get that, and I saw the things that she would. Help with conversations.
It's cold out there. It's not bad when you're indoors, but it's not. It's very pretty.
Would be a lack of. And then you'll chime in if you see questions or. Yeah, and what about in the room, like, I guess, to make sure people are being heard, they supposed to be talking to their microphone, is Jennifer talking to the microphone? You guys can try to have heard, if we can get everyone to listen to them. We do, like, when people have. We're going to position it in the direction. Sitting in your front desk working. It'll go by quicker. If anything, I can't remember how long they were before, but they always ran out of time, you know. I think they were maybe 20 minutes or something. They get Harriet Mandy. I can't remember if it's from the UK or something. She's on the speaker. So I've heard that's the one that we use a Zoom with.
No.
Yeah.
I'm from Michigan. It doesn't bother me.
Where they came from, where they're getting it from. And so, yeah, and they found their way here and then they get back up. Oh, very good. So that's it is pretty
Virtual platforms.
Part of our city and stuff like
that. And so now they have water boil over. So they couldn't stay in the door. So basically we're like, we're going to be champagne all, we're going to be busing the students to the house. I was like, no, I think you should come back. She was like, yep. I'm not going back too soon this time. And it's funny to watch somebody like that. Because like I knew. It's gonna be virtual for a while. You might as well just be comfortable in your home, rather than miserable and in some sort of state emergency. So that was part of my morning was to win this morning, and then it was cool, interesting. We had a very well-dressed woman. Apparently, did a witness car and got shut down. Number one. Yeah. Yes. And I was like,
All right, I'm told that we're ready for breakout rooms. If, we give you guys another minute to wrap up your conversation.
Darn it.
That's exciting. That's so much fun.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Chilly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Got to get the rest of our room in here.
right. Where's the rest of the room? I'm just trying to get on schedule. I think Stephanie just did that. Yeah. All right. Are they coming? Yeah. Are they coming? Sorry for the virtual folks. We do have some folks out there. Where are they coming from, Stephanie? On the Zoom.
Oh, sorry. Gotta go
And
to,
some of the folks shared with us where they're zooming in from.
yeah, let me go back to the top. All right. So we have Arizona, Malaysia, Ohio, India, Washington, D.C., in England are the ones that I see on the chat. So
Wow.
great representation.
Thank you. So this is a great part of the event right now, and the probably maybe I wouldn't say the best, because I think Jennifer's got that spot, and I think Heather's gonna match with that one too. So, but it is one of the powerful parts of today's event, which is the breakout sessions. I want you guys to have the opportunity to ask questions that are burning. We do have a facilitator in each of the rooms and a co-facilitator. And what you'll find is that either or will have experience in this area of vision loss. So ask them questions, be vulnerable if you'd like. The rooms are not going to be recorded. They will shut off after 45 minutes, is it? Yeah. 45 minutes with a 2 or 3 minute warning. So, you know, you can wrap up your thoughts at that moment. For now, we've got room number 1, which is low vision, functional blindness. We'll discuss navigating life's maze without relying on sight. And that's going to be co-facilitated by Lisa and Jennifer Zuckerman. So I think both of you are here, so you're going to stay in this room, which is room 1. Room 2 is total blindness, light perception. That's where we'll discuss seeing the essence of existence in shades of light. That'll be co-facilitated by Brianna Willett and Chuck Wells, both who are here. So you're going to go to outside of this room, make a left, and the first door on the left will be the room that you will be at. And room 3 is blindness and more. We'll discuss for blindness is just the beginning of a unique journey, co-facilitated by Stephanie Brunel and Wallace Stuckey, both who are virtual with us. So if we all take a moment, all facilitators and volunteers who have experience as a parent, caregiver, individual living with a rare retinal disease. To our virtual guests, you can join any room you'd like by clicking on breakout rooms in your meeting controls. Over your pointer, over the number to the right of the breakout room you wish to join. Click join and then confirm by clicking join again. You can click on leave room to return to the main session. We'll do that after the breakout rooms close. To our in-person guests, again, room 1, you'll stay here, 2 is next door, and 3 is the ones furthest. The breakout room sessions are not recorded. So while we take a moment to do that, for those of you that are here, there's box lunches there. If your stomach is growling, go ahead and feel free to grab a box lunch now, or you can get it later when we come back and resume in the room. So at this moment, if we can all take our rooms, that'd be great.
So those on virtual, you may need to click more to see your breakout room session. When you click more, you'll see breakout rooms, and then you can join whichever room you would like by clicking the blue join button next to the room.
Thank you. Blue button, join. Thank you.
Remind me what you wanted me to do. I'm supposed to do something in the breakout. Okay. I think we're good. Okay. I think I might go listen to Wallace. Gotta get him back.
So thank you. So feel free to peruse that table. There's also a handout in there that has different it lists all the items and prices. So if it's something that you think is interesting or maybe interesting for you, you can kind of get a feel of where to find it and how much it might cost. And then there's handouts as well. So feel free to go over there and do that throughout today. And for now, Dr. Bone, take it away. Start the second half here.
Hey, Louisa, and welcome back, everybody. I am going to be brief because I want as much of our time to go to Heather. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Heather Hutchinson, a very, very successful writer, singer, songwriter, who speaks with clarity, candor, and compassion about the challenges that she's faced in her life, from blindness and other issues that have arisen as a consequence thereof. So we're really, really pleased and feel quite fortunate to have Heather with us today. So with no further ado, Heather.
If you just click in this black area, it'll advance.
You're good, Heather. Pardon? You're good, yeah.
It's so great to be here in person. I did a lot of public speaking online during the pandemic. It was honestly a little disconcerting to never get to hear any of the audience reaction while I was speaking. So now I'm really excited that I get to at least hear the crickets when one of my jokes that oh, we got some laughter. Okay, that's a really good start. Love it. I'm honored to be here today to talk to you about acceptance, whether that's acceptance as blindness of part of your identity, acceptance of a child's diagnosis and identity as someone who's blind, or dealing with the topic of acceptance in a clinical setting with patients and their families. What are some things we can do to foster that confidence that leads to self-acceptance? What are some things that are commonly done that actually do more harm than good? This is 15-year-old me for the blind people here. I'm in my goth phase. Everything is black. There's chains, fishnets, the whole 9 yards. And if you had told 15-year-old me sitting in my ophthalmologist's office that I would be here speaking to you today, I would have been like, no. And that bored, flippant, so done with this tone mastered by teenagers the world over. And if you had told me 3 years ago, as I lay in a hospital bed, that I would be here speaking to you, well, I probably wouldn't have said anything at all. So what happened between then and now? Just one of those little life-changing moments, sometimes referred to as rock bottom. And then gradual acceptance. That last one's still a bit of a work in progress, but we're getting there. These are things it took me until it was almost too late to figure out. These are truths I wish my community had spoken to me, and truths I wish I'd listened harder to hear. It took ending up as an involuntary patient in a secure psychiatric facility in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic for me to figure out what I was doing wasn't working. And a big part of what wasn't working was being ashamed of myself and feeling undeserving of the space I was taking up in the world. I spent so much time fighting against society's perceptions of me as a blind person that I ended up hiding away from the world. And in the end, the only person I was really fighting against was myself. Lying in that hospital bed, I finally understood that if I was going to get better, I would need to drastically change how I thought about myself and how I allowed society's perceptions of me as a disabled person to affect me. In essence, I was going to need to learn to fight for myself. This is my story. I was born blind, but I wasn't born knowing the world saw me as different. I grew up very close with my older brother and cousins, and I tagged along behind them like a pesky shadow as they rode bikes, built forts, and climbed trees. No one ever told me I couldn't, and I never imagined that would change. I mean, my brother did tell me I was annoying on the regular, but that was more because I was annoying than because I was blind. My father actually received a cancer diagnosis at pretty much the same time as I got my official diagnosis. And even back then, I remember those events with far more clarity because me, as far as I was concerned, I was just fine. So there I am as a child living in my little bubble of people who accepted me for who I was. And I had a mild curiosity about why some people seemed to be able to see things I couldn't, but it was just a fact, neither positive nor negative, kind of like having been born with brown hair and blue eyes. The day that all changed, I was 5 years old and I met a new friend on the playground. He was a boy a few years older than I was, and we made fast friends as only kids can as we chased each other across the monkey bars and up and down the slides. We'd been playing together for quite a while when he asked me why I never looked at anything. And super matter of fact, I told him, oh, I'm blind. Sort of like how you tell somebody what you had for dinner. And he turned on me so swiftly, it was shocking. I was standing at the top of the slide and he pushed me backwards so hard I fell in a heap a few feet away. Then he yelled out some 7-year-old equivalent of "you're worthless because you're blind," flew down the slide, jumped on his bike, and pedaled away as though the hounds of hell were on his tail. And I lay there on my back. And I still remember how 1,000 little moments started to click into place for me. I understood in that moment, in as much as a 5-year-old could, that I was different, and different was bad. I also understood that this was forever. And forever is an awfully long time when you're 5 years old. So I made a promise to myself that day on the playground that I would find a way to keep my blindness a secret from everyone. I intently studied the body language of the characters in the books I read, trying to mimic it so I could pass as sighted, which never worked. But I kept on trying because in my child's mind, I truly believed that if I just worked a little bit harder, nobody would ever know. But it was futile and exhausting, and I felt like I was constantly failing every time someone figured it out. So I withdrew. I made myself smaller. I apologized for my needs instead of embracing them and believing I was deserving of having those needs met. For years, I couldn't even say the words, "I'm blind," and that shame has persisted into adulthood and colors the perceptions of myself that I am still working to change. It was around this time that I noticed also some other kids, some of my classmates, started treating me differently as well. They would steal things I was using, sneak up behind me, disguise their voices, and ask, "Who am I?" To which I usually gave them the snarky reply of "an idiot." When that game inevitably devolved into "how many fingers am I holding up?" I would hold up a particular finger in the middle of my hand and say, "I don't know. How many am I holding up?" I noticed that some adults even seemed to be uncomfortable in my presence, and that some of my friends' parents were excluding me from things. I remember not being allowed to go to a friend's birthday party because her mom said their house was not suitable for blind people. Now, I'm not sure what kind of houses she thinks blind people live in, but apparently their house was not it. I've been the kind of kid who would chat away happily to strangers as though we were longtime friends, but within a few years of being in school, I was shy, reserved, and anxious. Having said that, though, in the circle of people I trusted, my childhood was very typical. My friends and I ran barefoot through our neighborhood, riding bikes, rollerblades, scooters, flying through ice-cold sprinklers on banana yellow slip-and-slides. I went to gymnastics, swimming, and music lessons. Northern winters were punctuated by family ski trips to the mountains and hockey games played on backyard ice rinks. I know I totally just told you guys I'm Canadian without actually saying I'm Canadian. There was a lot of Tim Hortons in there as well. I was a really self-possessed kid. If I wasn't successful at something or somebody doubted me, that only made me work harder. I should say it was my mom who called me self-possessed, which is a really kind way of saying annoyingly stubborn, because my mom, bless her, I'm sure I'm the cause of more than a few of her gray hairs, understood that I needed to be allowed to fall and get back up again, and fall I did, fairly regularly. Though I spent a lot of time in typical extracurricular activities, I also spent a lot of time in the offices of specialists where they ran a lot of tests and talked a lot about eventual potential treatment options. This became a very common topic of discussion in my family, and I remember being frequently told that once I got my vision, we would throw a huge party and invite absolutely everyone we knew. This seemed strange to me, because what exactly would we be celebrating? It wasn't like I myself had achieved something great. No matter how hard I worked, research and treatment was really out of my hands. So it felt like they were saying that I would be a better version of myself once I got my sight, And that better version of me is what we would actually be celebrating. Don't get me wrong, research is absolutely critical, and treatment has and will continue to change the lives of so many people. And by all means, having these conversations occasionally in an age-appropriate way with your child is great. You know, maybe telling them that one day they may have the option to choose to see, that it'll be completely up to them, and that they are equally worthy, whether or not they choose treatment or whether or not treatment is even available to them in their lifetime. But letting it consume you and the conversations you have with your child can actually do more harm than good and lead to a decreased sense of acceptance, because it can feel to that child like everyone around them is constantly talking about how to change them, and that must mean there's something inherently wrong with who they are right now. The year of the playground incident was also the year I started piano lessons. Initially, it was part of my physical therapy. I was born with hypotonia or low muscle tone, and thinking was that playing the piano would help strengthen my hands and wrists. Now, I'm not sure how much good that actually did, but the piano was the start of a lifeline that I could cling to in the coming years when things got tough. I wish I could say I was a super dedicated music student and I practiced really hard, but that would be a complete lie. I was a terrible student. I was much more interested in making up my own songs or figuring out songs by ear that I heard on the radio, and the pieces in my books, who I thought of as written by boring dead guys, held little interest. I did love music though. I carried one of those little Fisher-Price tape recorders around with me everywhere, making up songs and stories, and I even struck a deal with my brother to lend me $100 so I could record an album when I was 6. Now, $100 does not go very far in the recording studio, so thankfully this project never got off the ground. And before you're like, oh, that's so sweet of them, this was not altruism on my brother's part. He was actually charging me 30% interest on the loan. While I didn't stay in piano lessons for more than a few years, much to my piano teacher's relief, I am sure, this was far from the end of my journey in music, because fast forward a few years, the teen years hit and things got rough. I felt isolated and alone, like nobody really understood what I was going through. I struggled to belong in a teenage world where fitting in was valued above all else. The school bullies, while having played fairly harmless pranks in elementary school, became much more ruthless in junior high and high school. Well, we did have the internet. I'm not quite that old. We didn't use it quite like people do today, and while I knew a couple of other blind teens in my city, for the most part, we were never very close. I think because blindness is such a rare experience, it can be hard, especially at that age, to find people you click with because the pool of candidates is really quite small. So thankfully, the internet, I think, has changed that in a really big way. And I think that's amazing, and it's also very important to strike a balance. You know, find a community of people who share in your unique experience. You know, people who can commiserate on the annoying questions people always ask us, or how adaptive technology never seems to work properly. Am I right? But also being a part of that wider world, not walling yourself off and only spending time with other blind people or other families with blind children. In those years, I often felt stuck between two worlds because that balance is very hard to strike. While I wasn't a bad kid per se, I maybe spent more time than some other blind children doing typical teenage things. You know, think back on your own teen years, use your imagination. And many of their parents, out of love for them, tried to keep them close and tried to keep them in a bit of a bubble, and that made them seem younger than they actually were. So I could tell their parents didn't really want me around. You know, in retrospect, my fashion choices probably didn't help matters either. Conversely, though, the wider world was pretty intent on reminding me I was different there too. So I often felt like I had two completely different identities. There was the blind girl who tried to be good but wasn't really, or the girl who shunned absolutely everything to do with blindness but still didn't fit in that bigger world either. I also didn't really have any role models with disabilities growing up. Something kind of strange happens with role models in the disability community. The only role models I ever heard about were like Paralympians or people who climbed Mount Everest or did some extraordinary feat that proved that there were no limits. And that's absolutely amazing. Sighted kids also had these role models in athletes and stars. However, sighted kids also have the grounding factor of everyday role models to look up to. Their parents, their friends' parents, their teachers, who are just like them, living ordinary lives. I never really got to see people with disabilities living ordinary lives. And in my case, as well as for many other people I've talked to who share similar sentiments, this lack of everyday role models with disabilities led to a very unhealthy obsession with perfection. Because you are either on top of the world doing things that few people, disabled or able-bodied alike, will ever do, or you were sitting at home doing nothing. We didn't see the in-between, so we felt like we had to work 110% harder because just being was not good enough. So unsure of where to turn in those confusing teenage years, I returned to music and songwriting. I spent a lot of time, I was supposed to be taking notes in class, frantically writing song lyrics. Blind person perk, I didn't use a screen, nobody could tell what I was up to. Songwriting was a really healthy way for me to sort through a lot of those typical teenage emotions, and realizing that I would need to be able to accompany myself as I sang, I returned to piano lessons. The summer I was 15, urged by my music teacher, I very, very reluctantly entered a provincial talent competition where I performed one of my original songs. One of the judges for the finals of that competition was a music producer. He found me at the backstage afterwards and told me to give him a call about recording some music together. And while I was flattered, I never let myself believe anything would come of it. I was young and inexperienced, and these were the kind of things that happened in books and movies. This wasn't real life. But he proved me wrong, because a month later, there we were in the studio recording an album. It's difficult to put into words exactly what it felt like to walk into the recording studio for the first time. It felt to me like coming home after a long, long time away. The studio was a place that made sense when the world didn't. It was a place that was safe for me when the world wasn't. It was a place where blindness didn't matter because music came first. To all the engineers, producers, and other musicians, I was just a girl who loved music. And I think having an experience like that, finding an opportunity in a blind child's life, is so crucial. Obviously, it doesn't have to be that experience exactly, or even music related, but find a place where your child can forget for a while, where the world isn't constantly reminding them they're different, where they can be empowered because they're playing on an equal playing field. In my case, the studio was really the only place I ever truly felt like me. 6 months after that first day in the studio, I stepped out on stage to perform at my very first CD release party. Remember the party I was supposed to get? when I got my vision, well, still blind, but in the end, I did get my party with everyone we knew and a lot of bonus people we didn't. So it worked out. Music was a safety net for me, and I'm not sure in what direction my life would have gone without it. But unfortunately, even music was not enough to stop the signs of mental health issues that I had been struggling with since I was very young, from becoming more prominent during these years. Looking back, there were signs from about 6 years on that were dismissed by doctors as just things I grow out of. And I'm not blaming anyone's, hindsight's 2020, and I know we've learned a lot since then, but it's unfortunate because, as in so many illnesses, mental illnesses are often much more easily treated if caught early. So parents, doctors, please be aware of the signs. It's very, very easy and natural, I think, for parents and doctors to focus on the obvious thing that's wrong, the lack of vision, and they miss the bigger picture. Specialists, I know mental health is not really your responsibility and you do incredible work, but you have an amazing opportunity to look for signs yourself, to read between the lines of what parents say, to talk to parents about the signs that they may see in their children as a respected medical professional. This can make such a difference in treatment outcomes if a child is given the appropriate treatment at a young age. So parents and specialists, if you take one thing away from this talk, I hope it will be to take a blind child's mental health seriously. Now, of course, not all blind people are going to have mental health issues, but there is a higher prevalence of mental health issues in the disabled population. And it's something I'm incredibly passionate about bringing awareness to, because I think it doesn't get talked nearly enough in the context of disability and in blindness. And in my mind, that is a much greater tragedy than a lack of eyesight. I've been in and out of the offices of doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, social workers, and other mental health professionals since I was 13, and on and off of different medications since university. While things might get better for a while, there were never really any answers. And even some mental health professionals sort of have this attitude of, you're blind. I mean, of course you're going to feel like that. What do you expect? And while validation is great at times, I needed actionable steps I could take to get better. And I never really got those. But as it does, life went on. I graduated from high school, started studying psychology, dropped out of university to study music full-time, maybe not the most common career path, but here we are. I worked in music and also in web design, teaching and consulting, so I bounced around quite a bit. And then one day I said to my partner, I think we should move to South America. So we did. I'm not sure if my powers of persuasion are just that great or why he agreed to go, but he did agree. He didn't speak Spanish. We had nothing lined up and we took almost nothing with us, but we went and we made a life for ourselves. And it was hard and scary and beautiful and everything I needed, because in the dirty streets of Lima, Peru, I found my peace. The people there didn't ask a million questions. They didn't disguise their voices or ask how many fingers they were holding out. They didn't care. They were far more interested in what life was like in Canada than how I got dressed in the morning. And because they accepted me, I started to accept me too. So when circumstances forced our return to Canada, I was devastated. The sense of belonging and inclusion that I had known living there was only truly matched by my time in the recording studio. I felt like I'd been more me living there than I had ever been in Canada. And upon our return, we were stopped in the airport by a man who asked my partner, didn't even have the courtesy to address me directly, what was wrong with me and if I had been born like that. And I felt this overwhelming rush of hopelessness because in all the time I had lived in South America, I had never been treated that way. And within 5 minutes of being back in Canada, I was reminded of exactly why I had wanted to leave. We ended up in a really small town in Canada where my partner found work and I floundered. I couldn't find work. There were practically no public transit options, and even if there had been, there was really nowhere to go. As someone who had been fiercely independent, sometimes to the point of stubbornness, having to suddenly rely on people for what felt like everything was incredibly difficult. And I felt myself being absorbed into the people around me, no longer sure of who I was or what I wanted or what my needs were. My mental health issues, while always present in the background like an annoying ache that just won't go away, worsened significantly during that time. First, I stopped recording music. Then I stopped playing music live. Then I stopped writing music. Finally, I stopped playing music altogether. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I pulled away from everyone. I would turn my phone off for days or sometimes even weeks at a time and just disappear. And despite ongoing medical and mental health treatment, I couldn't stabilize. And then COVID hit, and my doctors and therapists became a lot harder to reach as the world tried to adjust to this crisis. And finally, the day came when I gave up on life. I saw no resolution, no end to the pain. I would always be who I was, and I couldn't accept that. Nor could I accept the burden I felt like I was constantly placing on my loved ones. So if they wouldn't leave me, I would do the leaving for them. I would take myself away from the world. Long story short, that's how I ended up in a hospital bed 3 years ago. What I remember most about that first day was the kind ER doctor sitting next to me telling me I wouldn't be allowed to leave, and the heavy metal door automatically locking behind my partner as he left. This was COVID, there were no visitors allowed. We had no idea when we were going to see each other again. It was an incredibly uncertain time. And I remember being numb, but also unsurprised, thinking I always knew it would end this way. I've truly come to the end of the road. And it took some time for me to realize that I was wrong, that I hadn't come to the end of the road that day. I had come to the fork in the road because that kind ER doctor had given me the greatest gift. She had given me the choice to choose a different ending. It was one sleepless night in the hospital that I bore silent witness to a series of events that would change the course of my life and ultimately lead me here to be speaking with you today. Up until that point in the hospital, I hadn't wanted to get better. I was merely biding my time until the doctors gave up on me, as I had given up on myself. But that particular night, the medevac helicopter arrived, bringing a critical patient to this bigger center for treatment. And if you haven't been up close when a helicopter lands, it is loud. The entire building shakes, and for the first couple times, you wonder when exactly that the copter is going to come crashing through the building. It's very hard to miss. And shortly after the helicopter arrived, a code blue was called for that patient. They were dying. And I thought about that patient's loved ones. They were having one of the scariest nights they would ever know. And I wondered how I could feel so much compassion for this stranger's loved ones while knowing the decision I wanted to make would devastate my own. And then I started thinking about the person, the patient themselves, and what a wild juxtaposition it was. That they were in here fighting to live, and I was in here fighting to die, and one of us had a choice. So that night, I chose life. In the hospital, I finally got proper diagnoses and answers, and with few exceptions, I was treated with compassion without condescension. People were supportive without coddling. For one of my first times in my life, I felt like I was being treated in the medical system as a person first and foremost. Even with many family doctors or non-blindness related specialists I've had over the years, naturally the focus seems to shift to blindness because it's not something they see every day. And it can be really easy and really common to lose sight of that bigger picture, I think, when you're treating patients with disabilities that they don't see every day. I wish I could say that night in the hospital I had an epiphany and life did a complete 180, but if anything, things got harder after that night because I finally cared enough to try. It took a lot of work and so much time and so much support from doctors and loved ones, but gradually I started wanting to fight. I had this overwhelming need stemming from that night in the hospital to share my story, to keep even one person from going through that pain, to strip away the mystery of what happens behind those locked doors, particularly when a patient has a physical disability. Because when I was going through it, my loved ones could not find any information on what that would be like for me, if there would be certain accommodations I would receive as somebody who is blind, or what the process would be. There were no resources, so I felt like I needed to create one because it's an incredibly difficult experience for anyone to go through. But as a blind person, it can be extra scary to suddenly find yourself in a place you don't know, that you can't leave, with a lot of very unpredictable things going on around you, including violence that you can hear but you can't see, and the doubts about whether or not the doctors, care aides and psych nurses will even be able to meet your unique needs as someone in a mental health crisis who also has a physical disability. So for some reason, I decided that the best way, also the most painful, complicated, and just generally difficult way to tell my story would be to write a book. Because sure, why not? I think most people in my life didn't think I would finish. There were many times I didn't believe I would ever finish. I still remember my therapist kind of trying to disguise his shock when a year later, my memoir, Holding On by Letting Go, was published. And shortly after the book came out, I took the experiences that I lived in the book and translated them into music and released a kind of musical companion project to go with the book. And it was in doing publicity for the book and the music that I found my long and meandering way to social media, and more specifically to short form video content. My best friend strongly believed that I should make videos because she thought people would be interested in my perspective as someone who's blind, who also deals with mental health issues. And I felt like I was 15 years old again because I was like, no, absolutely not. That is not going to happen in this lifetime. I'd been doing a ton of work on acceptance by myself and in therapy, but this felt next level. Because as someone who literally used to curate my social media content so people online wouldn't be able to tell I was blind, this was a huge step out of the old comfort zone. But My bestie is nothing if not persistent, and gradually I started making videos. And at first they were very curated. They were about strictly books and music, but slowly I started adding in aspects of my daily life as a blind person. And truly to my shock, because I genuinely did not believe anyone would care, people responded. And their responses were overwhelmingly positive. And I found a community of people who share in similar experiences and other people who want to do better and want to learn and realize that the voices of disabled people themselves need to be heard in order for us to make true lasting change. Within a few months, some of my videos were being watched by millions of people around the world. And now, with every video I make, with every person who tells me they learned something from my work, or that I challenge them to think about something differently, with every step I take, no matter how small, to break down barriers and misconceptions about blindness, I too get a little more comfortable with who I am. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that the road ahead will be easy. That would be disingenuous. But we have a huge opportunity to guide ourselves, our loved ones, our patients towards acceptability. Because acceptance is made up of 1,000 little moments that teach us how to view ourselves. And we can shape that narrative for ourselves, for our loved ones, for patients, even for complete strangers, by ensuring that as many of those 1,000 little moments as possible are positive and affirming and empowering. You can help foster this acceptance as a parent by allowing your child the freedom to fall so they can get back up again. Your child needs to play freely. They need to go to the movies with their friends. They need to do whatever age-appropriate activity they're interested in. I recognize that there may be multiple disabilities at play, but whatever they can reasonably do, they should be doing. They should be into everything. They should be driving you crazy. And if they are driving you crazy, I know it may not feel like it right now, but they are going to need that indomitable spirit and that tenacity. Your child needs to be able to develop an identity and to be confident in that identity. And in order for that to happen, they're going to need to make mistakes. So if you get to yell at your blind teen for missing curfew, you've done well, because you've given your child the freedom and the agency and the confidence and the independence to make decisions, even if those decisions aren't always the best decisions. Your child needs your faith in them and in their capabilities, because the world is going to constantly tell them no. It's going to tell them both in actions and in words, you can't. And if that's what they hear all the time at home too, it's going to be that much harder for them to accept and believe in themselves and to get out there and to prove the world wrong. You can help by finding role models of everyday people with disabilities and showing them to your child. And by having open conversations about your child's potential treatment options without pressure for them to make the decision you hope they will make, or a fixation on the topic. Enjoy your child for who they are right now and not who they could possibly be in the future. Find places, activities where your child is on an equal playing field, because that feeling of empowerment is so, so crucial. That feeling of I belong. Specialists, you can help as a doctor by treating the person behind the blindness. When, as a patient, you're in a specialist office or in a teaching hospital, it can feel a bit like you're a lab rat with all the doctors coming in, poking and prodding and talking about how your diagnosis is manifesting and whatever else. And especially in the teen years, you just want to feel normal, and that experience does not really lend itself to feeling normal. So every person who walks through that door is a person with unique needs, talents, and experiences, and there is a person behind that diagnosis. You can also help by talking to parents about mental health challenges their child may face, and perhaps providing resources for where those parents can turn if that does become a concern. You can help as a doctor or as a parent by ensuring that mental health issues are addressed and that they don't fly under the radar because blindness takes precedence in their care. And finally, to my fellow blind people, acceptance is not a linear process. It can often feel like you're taking one step forward and 2 steps back. And it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to think this isn't fair. It's okay to feel all the things. But then you get up the next day and you try again. We're not yet at a place where all of society accepts people with disabilities and embraces us. But when we start to learn to accept ourselves, it gets easier. I'm not going to say easy, but easier to deal with the people who don't accept us. I want you to remember that your needs matter, even when they feel like an inconvenience. Your voice matters, even when it feels small. So little by little, and step by step, get out there and show the world exactly who you are. Because you, yes, you, are worth every bit of space you take up in this world.
Heather, it's Tony, I'm coming up. First of all, thank you. That was extraordinary. I really appreciate your sharing your experience and your thoughts in such an articulate and I don't know, clear-eyed way. I'd like to open it to the audience, both present and virtual. If anybody has, if I may, Heather, if anybody has any questions, feel like to direct towards Heather. Yes.
You know what, just one.
Lisa.
You mentioned, giving your children the opportunity to get involved in activities that kind of provide an even playing field for them. Like, can you give me ideas or examples? I know music was an avenue for you, but anything else you could think of?
Yeah, music was a big one. Things like maybe different arts like pottery, things where they can use their hands, where their hands are like more of an asset. I really think that like a lot of it is in the arts. You can find activities within the arts, and I also feel like that's a really genuinely welcoming community as well. So, there's a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds in the arts, and I think they do a really great job often of making people feel welcome and included.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Where do you draw your musical inspiration?
Life, everything, or sometimes somebody will tell me a story and then I'll combine it like with experiences from my life and sort of try and make it more like universal, so it's a song that everyone can relate to. But yeah, they say write what you know, so that's what I try and do.
You compose at the piano?
Yes.
And so what do you do to make sure you don't lose a really great riff you just give up with? Do you record while you're at the piano.
Oh, you know how many times that happened? I'm gonna remember this one. I'm gonna remember this one. I'm too lazy to go get my phone, but it's in here. So if I'm smart about it, yeah, I will go grab my phone and record like a rough sample on that and take it from there.
I think Dr. Midden has a question.
Yeah, that was, thank you, for talking to everybody today, Heather, and, as a Canadian with long hair and a little bit of a rocker, I'm very interested in hearing you tell us who are the musicians and artists that you listen to and are your favorite albums?
That's hard. I really love Poesia right now. I don't know if anybody knows her music.
The one on YouTube.
My daughter probably knows. Well,
Well, you on YouTube as well.
When I first started, it was Evanescence. It was like, I mean, you might have like seen the resemblance. Always like people ask me this question and my mind goes blank and I'm like, oh, I gotta look at my Spotify playlist. Just a lot of, for me, like the vocal is obviously like the focal point. So really great singers, even like from the city. I'm from Lauren Spencer Smith. You know, he's got a really great voice. There are some people on TikTok even that are really doing incredible things. So and there's a lot of really, I know there's a lot of people that are like, the music industry, like musicians aren't what they once were and everything, but there's a lot of really great music that's still happening out there. Right?
thanks. Anything online?
No, not at this time. And I believe Louisa has something for our presenter as well, don't you?
Yes, yes, I did.
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, let's segue to you.
Okay.
There's something small, token of appreciation for you to remember in front. There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you. And this is for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
I hope, I want to thank everybody that's been online with us. Thank you so much. We have, while we have been working hard, Heather, thank you. Jennifer, thank you. While we've been working hard, so has the young ladies that are here with us today. So we can have Mia and Aria and their leaders come in here. They've been hard at work making something. Let's show everybody what you've made. And their leaders, Anna and Bianca, who have been spending some time. Show them what it does. So you can take some snow home with you.
And a picture of their new bestie.
Yeah. Yes.
It is.
All right, folks, so, gosh, the thank yous. So, let me start with, my PR team. So Louisa, Stephanie, Heather, Bree, Nicole, Tracy, thank you all for kind of putting it all together and making it all work. Special thanks, of course, to Jennifer and Heather for sharing yourselves with us today. And I'd like to thank all of you who joined us today. The foundation sort of lives, breathes, and works for you. And it's been a delight to see folks here in person and to have folks participate online in our first hybrid. So we will segue to tours of the PRRL for those who have an interest. And I'd like to close by saying one more thank you to everybody today.
want to acknowledge Dr. Matt Tracy, who's with us today. Without their support, we wouldn't be here, and Dr. Johnson, thank you so much. So as we walk over to the tour and as you're in that place, and Dr. Minton, you can maybe give us a few do's and don'ts on the way there, or what we should do. Yes, and then, you know who to ask questions to if you have any questions. And those online, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Oh, what did Walton say?
Well said. Thank you to Heather for sharing her story and to Jennifer for sharing her music.
Oh, thank you.